think there's something inside us as Christians that really wants to know God's will for our life. And especially if there's something specific that He would have us do. I know that that was really my prayer as a young teenager. But it wasn't until I fully surrendered my life to Jesus at 14 that I even really had that desire. Because before then, it was like part of me loved Jesus, but part of me wanted to do my own thing. When I went all in with Him, there came along with that dedication a deep, deep desire to do His will. And not just to do His will, but to be available to do whatever He might want me to do. Well, I remember at age 16, I'd been dating this guy, but I realized that he wasn't God's best for my life. And so I said, God, would you please take this desire for a boyfriend away? And He did. Miraculously, He took it away. But it was that year at youth camp, once again, God met me in a powerful way, and He laid out His plan for my life, calling me specifically to be a pastor's wife, and even showing me the man I was going to marry, which is a whole nother video. But I remember as John and I entered ministry, I loved being a pastor's wife, and yet there was still this sense that maybe there was something else that God had me to do. And so I kept kind of bringing it before the Lord. I also began to recognize that there was this stirring in my heart to speak to women. Well, it wasn't just a stirring, can I be honest? It was like a flat out fire shut up in my bones that the Bible speaks of. Just a desperate desire to speak to women about the good news of Jesus Christ and all that He wants to be to us. But for whatever reason, God did not honor that desire. In fact, He refused to open doors. And just when I thought He might, He didn't. Because there was more that He wanted to do in me. You see, I'm really, really convinced that God's more interested in building His kingdom in us than He is in building His kingdom through us. But I didn't know what to do with that longing, with that desire. And so sometimes, every once in a while, I would go and ask a woman in leadership, what do I do with this desire to speak? But no one really could give me any guidance except just pray, honey. And I thought, well, I have prayed, but what am I supposed to do in the meantime? God was so faithful to meet me with these words. It's your job to deepen the message. It's God's job to broaden the ministry. And suddenly I had my marching orders. Suddenly I knew what I was supposed to do with this in-between time between the call and the fulfillment of what I felt God had put on my life. But it was also during that time when God challenged me to lay down my dream of speaking to women. Because you see, even the call can be fancy food for the flesh. It can grow up around our pure desire to do something for the Lord and choke out the life of God within us. And I realized that that dream had kind of become an idol in my heart, an idol that I had to lay down and let go of and just simply pursue Jesus with no conditions. Being able to say, Lord, I want you more than I want ministry. I want you more than I want influence. I just want you. And God met me during that time, and He began to open His word to me in such beautiful, beautiful ways. And He had me record it all in my journal, this living document of my walk with Him. I had no idea that journal would become the vehicle to the call of God on my life. You see, I thought it was speaking to women, but God had another idea. It was during that time, about 30 years of age, when I felt inspired to write a little tribute for a man named Charlie. He came each week to our previous church in a wheelchair, and I would watch as he would worship the Lord. Though crippled on one side, he would raise the other hand with tears running down his face. And when I heard that he died, God began to stir this tribute that I penned down in my journal. And then actually, when we got to our next church, the youth sponsor's wife helped me put it in manuscript form, submit it for publication, and it was accepted. And I really thought that was it. I thought that was the end of my writing journey, because though I loved reading books, I never ever dreamed of writing books. I don't know that I even thought of the possibility. And yet, it was over those next 3 years as things continued to come out in my journaling as essays or articles that God began to just kind of stir a desire in my heart to write. John and I went out for our anniversary dinner and we just kind of shared what we felt God was stirring in us. And I said, I think I'd like to try to write. I think maybe he's calling me to write. I wasn't sure, but there was this stirring, and then there was evidence because things kept coming out like essays and articles. And so we just prayed about it. But it was probably a couple of months later when I saw a little advertisement in the newspaper for a Christian Writers Conference about 200 miles from where we lived. And I really had this inner desire to go. But wouldn't you know it, it was the same weekend as our statewide women's conference. And I knew I had about 7, 8 ladies that were going. And so it just wasn't possible for me to go. And so I kind of once again laid down that desire. But it was really strange because the week before we were scheduled to go, one by one, the women dropped off until there was only 2 people that were willing to go. And as we began to pray and say, Lord, is this even your will? To my surprise, the answer was no, it isn't. I called that writers conference director and I remember talking to her on the phone. It is, I believe it's Friday afternoon. The conference is already almost underway. And I said, hey, do you still have any openings? And by any chance, do you still have scholarships? Because I only had $100 that I could put towards my registration. And she said, just a minute. She went away and then she came back and she said, Joanna, if you can be here tomorrow morning, you can come to this conference. Well, I printed off all my little bits and pieces of things that I'd been working on, little articles that I'd started, and I took them with me to this writers conference. And I'll tell you what, it was a really special time and yet also really painful because when I submitted those articles, I would get notes back like, too preachy. Or another one said, we like the opening illustration, we'll give you $25 for that. But no one was impressed by my writing at all. I remember that night at the conference, Frank Peretti shared his story and his journey of publishing. And he talked about how he would write his manuscript for his famous classic book, This Present Darkness, on the back of old letter forms that were in the school library where he was a janitor. And he showed us this manuscript of This Present Darkness with all the edits and all the things, the actual manuscript of a book that's gone on to sell millions of copies. And he talked to us about how he was rejected 14 different times before that book was published. And you know, you would think that I would go away encouraged, but I went away so discouraged, just thinking, who am I kidding? Maybe this is just me. Maybe I'm just making this up. And I remember just saying, God, I've got to know that this is your idea. I need to know that this is your call on my life, because I honestly didn't have time for a hobby. I had 2 kids and I had a church to love and ministries that I was involved in. And I knew that to follow the call to write would be costly. But God was so kind in the middle of that discouragement to just give me a scripture reference. He only used this method for a short time during my walk with him, where he would just give me a scripture reference. And I remember thinking, oh Lord, I'm probably just making this up. But then I realized I couldn't think of very many references to writing in the Bible. So I thought, well, I'll look it up. And so I opened my Bible to Ezekiel 9:2 and I read these words, Joanna Weaver paraphrase for right now. 6 men came walking towards him with weapons at their sides. The 7th man wearing linen with a writing kit, WRITING, writing kit at his side. And I don't know, something left within my heart as I realized, oh, this isn't just a hobby. This is God's call on my life. And with those marching orders, I went home and began to study everything that I could about writing. We didn't have Google back then, so I went to the library and I checked out all the books, and I got the Writer's Digest magazine, and I began to learn how to write and how to put it in a format where you could send it to publishers. Because here's the deal, you may have a call of God to write, but he can't use it if it's sitting on your hard drive. You've got to take a chance. You've got to cast your bread on the water to see what God might want to do with that. And so I began to do that. Now you have to understand that my two deepest fears is fear of rejection and fear of failure. Those are the two things that I've worked my whole life to avoid. But guess what? That is exactly what a career in writing involves. You've got to take a risk. You've got to put it out there. And for a year and a half, though I was faithful to submit, I was faithfully rejected. And yet, rather than that discouraging me and making me want to give up, there was just this holy determination inside. Because you see, again, it wasn't just my idea. It was God's call on my life. He had led me step by step to this thing, and then he had confirmed it by his word. And I can't say that it was easy. I can't say that I didn't weep when I got rejected. But there was just this determination to keep on keeping on. Well, during that time, I also met a Christian writer named Tricia Goyer, who was also pursuing publishing. She was farther down the journey than I was, so she showed me how to format my manuscripts and how to get them ready for publication. I took a night class at the community college so I could learn how to write articles and get publishing credits. And all of that prepared me for the moment I went to a conference that Tricia had highly recommended, Mount Hermon's Christian Writers Conference, held over Palm Sunday each year. And I remember going and thinking, God, I know that you've called me to write, but I don't know if I'll ever be published. I know that you've called me to write, but I don't know if it's any good. But the Lord was so sweet. He met me there at that conference with incredible favor. And as I submitted my manuscripts to different editors, and as I got feedback, I had taken 3 different things, pieces of a novel that I had just in case maybe someone was interested. I also had a children's picture book that I had written, and I also had a proposal for a workbook, a ministry workbook for churches called Celebrate, Planning and Decorating for Special Events. Now, can I be honest? I really kind of prayed that that book would never get published. It wasn't the book I wanted to write, but it was the book that God gave me. And miraculously, you guys, that was the book that God used to open doors to my publishing career. The male editor for Moody Press loved my proposal. He hand carried it back to present it to his publishing board. God gave favor not only on that manuscript, but also on the children's picture book, and even on the novel that I had just pieces of, to the point that I went home with 4 different publishers interested in all 3 books. It really was kind of a Cinderella week for me, where a lot of my dreams came true, including being awarded Most Promising New Writer of the Year. An agent who was there approached me and wanted to represent me, but I was going home with 12 different publishers interested in my book, and so I thought, oh, this is kind of fun. I think I'll do it myself. But as I went home, you guys, every single one of those possibilities, well, either there was a change of direction, or the editor who was interested left the company and went somewhere else. But one by one, all 12 opportunities dried up, to the point that I called the agent and quite embarrassedly said, "Is there a chance you'd still want to represent me?" She said, "Sure, I would love to represent you." And she asked me to just write down the ideas that I had, because these other ones hadn't panned out. Did I have any new ideas? And so I wrote down some ideas, one of them being a wedding gift book that just took a look at the individual parts of the wedding vow. And she said, "I want that one." I sat down and I wrote that proposal, and about a quarter of the book, she presented it to different publishers. And 6 weeks later, Waterbrook Press expressed an interest, and that's how my career began. That book actually opened the door to my next book, Having a Merry Heart in a Martha World, which, though it took a little bit of time to take off, has now sold over 1 million copies. And that's something I would love to share with you in another video. But I want to tell you that not everything has been this straight upward climb. Instead, it's been a winding, twisting road that the Lord has brought me on, and it's continually brought me back to this truth. Joanna, just deepen the message, deepen your relationship with me, and then my will for your life will simply flow out of it. Because here's the deal. If I'm walking with Jesus today and tomorrow and the next day and the next day, I don't have to find God's will. I will be in God's will every step of the way. And I won't have to find my calling, because my calling will find me. You know, I am so grateful God has used me, and He's used my books in people's lives. But the sweetest gift of this writing journey has been the deepening and the enriching of my walk with Him. I've found Jesus on my journey. I've found Jesus in my calling, not just serving Him and doing things for Him, but actually finding Him in the journey in such beautiful ways. So what is God stirring in your heart? Well, the first step really is surrender. If we're holding on to part of our hearts, trying to give God the rest, but we're withholding, He really can't have His way in our lives. It's as though we have Him handcuffed. How can He have His way when we're not willing to give Him everything? And I know that can be scary, but oh, I can tell you, it is so worth it. That's where the adventure of following Jesus really begins. And number 2, deepen the message. Let God broaden the ministry. Fall in love with Jesus. Let Him reveal Himself to you through His Word and through time spent in His presence. Because as you deepen the message, you're going to have something significant to share. Years ago, we used to pray the prayer of Jabez, and one of the things that people really fixated on was, Lord, expand my territory. And what they were praying, Lord, is enlarge my ministry, give me more influence. But the Lord spoke to my heart, and He said, Joanna, if you're only this deep and I expand your territory, your life will thin to the point where it will not be able to stand the light of day. When trials come, you'll burn up. So deepen the message and let God, in His time and in His way, broaden the ministry. Number 3, I want to encourage you, hold that thing that He's called you to loosely. Oh, hold it loosely. Sometimes if we're not careful, that flesh can wrap around the call and it becomes our identity. This is my ministry. These are my books. And as a result, we cling to them so tightly that, as I mentioned before, they can become idols. So I'm learning to hold things loosely. Because here's the deal. God may choose to take you in a direction that you never imagined. I wanted to speak to women. I never dreamed that I would ever write a book, but it has been my books that have opened the door to speak to women. So hold things loosely and be tender to the leading of the Lord. Finally, be obedient. Just do the next thing He puts in front of you. You know, had I not got up from bed and begin to write that tribute to Charlie, had I not been willing to take the chance and risk of being rejected, I wouldn't be where I am today. So surrender all, deepen the message, and let God broaden the ministry. Hold things loosely. Be tender to the Spirit's leading. And be obedient to do what He's put in front of you. Because it may seem ordinary, it may seem mundane, it may seem like what you're doing doesn't matter, but everything is holy. Everything becomes God's call on your life. Even doing dishes and cleaning the toilet, even taking care of the babies in church so that mamas can have time in the service. All of it is the work of the Lord. So I pray that the Lord has spoke to you somewhere in this video, somewhere between the lines. He's kind of stirred something in your heart, or maybe confirmed something that He's been doing. You don't need to be afraid, and you don't need to try to make it happen. Just take those steps with Jesus, one step at a time, and you'll not only find God's will, you will be God's will every step of the way. God bless you, my friend.